My brother Ethan's voice was slick with triumph. "The view is incredible, Leo. You should see what you're missing." He'd inherited the penthouse levels of the Sterling Tower, our family's crown jewel in Chicago, while I got scraps. I sat in my office at Sterling Structural Design, staring at the building's original blueprints spread across my desk. My finger traced a faded, handwritten note from my father, a catastrophic structural shortcut buried in the plans for those exact top floors. Ethan thinks he won. He thinks he's living in a palace, gloating from his throne in the sky. He has no idea he's in a gilded cage, and I'm holding the only key. The schematics for his spectacular downfall were right in front of me. My brother and I were never equals. Our father made sure of that. Ethan was the charismatic frontman, the natural successor destined for the spotlight. I was the workhorse, the one who inherited our father's technical skill, but not his approval. "Ethan has the vision, Leo," he'd say, ruffling Ethan's hair while I stood by with a roll of drawings. "You just have the hands to build it." He thought he was defining our roles. He was forging my resentment. I spent my life in the shadow of that damn building, ensuring its integrity while Ethan planned parties in its penthouse. He took the glory for my designs, the acclaim for my sleepless nights. He never once bothered to look at the details, the numbers, the cold, hard engineering that kept his world from crashing down. He just saw the view from the top, and now the very hands he and my father dismissed are the ones that hold his fate. The foundation was always my responsibility. This time, I decide if it holds. My father's handwriting on the schematics wasn't just a note, it was a scar. I was 19, interning on the Sterling Tower construction site, the only place I ever felt close to him. I spent my nights poring over revisions, tracing the steel skeleton as it rose against the Chicago sky. That's when I found it. A change order for the penthouse levels. They were swapping out specified I-beams for a lighter, cheaper alternative. The math was wrong, dangerously wrong. I found my father in the site trailer, the air thick, with the smell of coffee and sawdust. Ethan was there, of course, flipping through a magazine, already practicing his role as the idle prince. "Dad?" I said, my voice tight. I unrolled the plans on his desk. "The load calculations for the top floors, they're off. This new beam specification won't handle the wind shear at that altitude. Not over time." He glanced at my frantic circles in red ink, his expression one of pure annoyance. "We're 3 weeks behind schedule, Leo. But the integrity of the Teju deadline is what matters right now," he snapped. Ethan looked up from his magazine, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. "I was just telling Dad about the launch party," Ethan chimed in, saving his own skin as always. "We could get the mayor to cut the ribbon. Imagine the press." My father's face softened instantly. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Now that's thinking about the future. That's the Sterling legacy." He turned back to me, his eyes cold steel. "You're getting lost in the weeds, son. This building is a statement, not a math problem." He picked up his pen, and right there, over my warnings, he scribbled the final approval on the blueprint. Asterisk, proceed as planned. RS. He didn't just ignore my warning. He invalidated my entire existence in a single sentence. He chose Ethan's party over my physics. He chose the appearance of strength over the real thing. I tried to argue once more, after Ethan had left, showing him the stress simulations I'd run on my university's computer. He took the printouts, folded them without looking, and slid them into a desk drawer. "This conversation is over," he'd said, his voice a low growl that promised consequences if I ever mentioned it again. Now, all these years later, Ethan is hosting his own parties in that very same space, living in the statement. He has no idea it was built on a lie I tried to prevent. My father gambled that the future would never arrive, that the weakness would never be tested. He was wrong. The test is here. And I'm the one administering it. The first step wasn't a wrecking ball, it was an email. It arrived the next morning, not from Ethan, but from his polished, overpaid assistant. The subject line read, "Invitation, the Sterling Legacy Gala." It was a grotesquely cheerful announcement for a black tie event in the penthouse to celebrate Ethan's, quote, new era of leadership. They were planning to host 500 of Chicago's elite in the very space I knew couldn't handle a sustained gust of wind, let alone the rhythmic vibration of a society party. The invitation was a death warrant, and they were all signing it in calligraphy. My resentment, once a hot, molten core, cooled into something sharp and precise. I turned from the old paper blueprints to my high-resolution digital scans of the tower's complete schematics. The penthouse floor was the endgame, but the opening move had to be subtle. A Trojan horse. My eyes scanned down, past the luxury floors, past the corporate offices, to the building's guts. I found what I was looking for on the 48th floor, the primary HVAC transfer deck. It was an engineering marvel of its own, a city block of machinery suspended midair. It was also, I knew from my own early designs, a nexus of vibration. We had over-engineered the dampeners, but I knew their precise resonant frequency. I knew how to make them sing a song no one wanted to hear. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a decade. "Frank," I said, when the grizzled voice of the tower's longtime facilities manager answered. "Leo Sterling. How are they treating you?" We exchanged pleasantries for precisely 90 seconds. Then I made my move. "Listen, Frank. I was reviewing some old files for a resonance study we're doing. Something about the Sterling Tower's profile caught my eye. It's probably nothing, but have you noticed any new vibrations on the upper floors, say between 45 and 50? I could almost hear him nodding, now that you mention it. Yeah. The boys said the cross bracings on the 48th floor deck have been humming a bit more than usual. We just put it down to the new turbines we installed last year. Could be, I said, my voice laced with casual concern. But with that kind of sustained harmonic, you could be looking at microfractures in the support welds. If it were my building, I'd want a full diagnostic. Get a structural engineer in there. Don't mention my name, just say you've got a hunch." It took less than a day. Just as I'd predicted, Frank's hunch sent a ripple of low-grade panic through Ethan's management team. An unscheduled engineering review is expensive and creates paperwork. And so my phone rang. "Leo?" Ethan's voice was clipped, impatient. "What the hell did you say to Frank? He's running around talking about microfractures. We have a gala in 3 weeks." I leaned back in my chair, feigning a sigh. "He called you? I just gave him some friendly advice. It's an old building, Ethan. Things need checking. You don't want any surprises." "I don't want any city inspectors either," he snapped. "This needs to stay quiet. Can't you, I don't know, handle it? Send one of your guys. Keep it in the family." The words hung in the air, a perfect, beautiful trap. He was inviting me in. He was handing me the keys to his kingdom so I could condemn it. "Of course, Ethan," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "My best team will be there tomorrow morning. We'll be discreet. You won't even know we're there." I hung up the phone. He wouldn't know we were there. But by the time my report was filed, the entire city of Chicago would know that he was. And they would know he was living on borrowed time. The first tremor had begun. My best team was one person. Anya Sharma, my sharpest and most unbendingly ethical engineer. I gave her the work order myself. "Anya, full diagnostic on the 48th floor HVAC deck at Sterling Tower. Follow standard procedure to the letter. Document everything. Don't cut any corners, no matter who asks you to." She nodded, her expression serious. She was a woman who lived by code, both building code and moral code. She was the perfect instrument. I spent the next day in my office, a general in his command tent, waiting for reports from the front. Anya's texts were clinical and precise. Asterisk 9:15 a.m. Accessing deck, 11:30 a.m. Initial sonic resonance tests complete. Readings are 4% above spec baseline. 2:45 p.m. Commencing visual inspection of load-bearing welds. I knew what she would find. Decades of normal wear, imperceptible to a layman, but to a meticulous engineer with a mandate to find problems, it would look like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to liability. At 4 o'clock, my private line rang. It was Anya. "Leo, I've finished the preliminary assessment." Her voice was pure professionalism. "The vibrations are causing some minor, but measurable, stress fatigue on several support welds. Nothing critical, but it's outside the acceptable tolerance for a structure of this age and height. Per protocol, I have to flag it." "And what does the protocol recommend?" I asked, keeping my own voice level. "A level 2 structural review of all vertically adjacent floors to trace the vibration path. We have to ensure the harmonics aren't propagating. It's a standard precaution. The report will need to be filed with the city's Department of Buildings." The perfect, beautiful, legally mandated checkmate. "Thank you, Anya. Write it up exactly as you see it." I let an hour pass before I called Ethan. I had to let him think I was wrestling with the information, trying to find a way to help him. When he picked up, his voice was tight with anxiety. "Well, what did your best team find? A loose screw?" "I wish it were that simple, Ethan," I began, my tone grave. "The vibrations are worse than we thought. They're not just contained to the HVAC deck. They're traveling up through the building's core supports." I paused, letting the silence stretch. Anya's official recommendation is a level 2 review of the upper third of the tower. A choked sound came through the phone. "The upper third? That's my home. That's the gala. Tell her to bury it. I'll make it worth her while." "I can't do that," I said, the feigned regret in my voice as solid as concrete. "This is a formal report now, Ethan. Her professional license is on the line. So is mine. If we ignore a documented structural concern and something happens, we'd be liable, criminally liable." "So what are you saying?" he whispered, the arrogance finally cracking. "I'm saying the party is off," I said, "and we have to inform the city. It's out of my hands now." The silence that followed was more damning than any accusation. I could hear the gears grinding in Ethan's head, the denial, the panic, the dawning, horrifying realization that he had lost control. He hung up without another word. The king, dethroned by a building regulation. I savored the quiet for a moment before forwarding Anya's report to the necessary city portals. The digital submission receipt was my declaration of war. It took 2 days for the official notice to be delivered. A crisp, cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered by a city courier, bearing the seal of the Chicago Department of Buildings. It announced the immediate and mandatory suspension of the certificate of occupancy for the top 10 floors of Sterling Tower, pending a full-scale, Level 3 structural investigation. All events were canceled. All residents, including my brother, were advised to vacate. My office door slammed open an hour later. Ethan stood there, his face a mask of purple rage, the city's letter crumpled in his fist. He looked nothing like the polished prince from the magazines. He looked like a cornered animal. "You son of a bitch," he spat, throwing the wadded paper onto my desk. It landed next to the very blueprints that started it all. He didn't even notice them. He never noticed the details. I didn't look up from my monitor. "If you're here to thank me for potentially saving your life, you're welcome." "Save my life? You've ruined me. The gala is canceled. The tenants are threatening to sue. The press is already calling. This is a public humiliation." "This," I said, finally turning to face him, my voice dangerously calm, "is a standard safety procedure. Something you would know if you ever paid attention to the business instead of just the cocktail parties." "I'll hire my own engineers," he snarled. "The best in the country. They'll find this is all a lie, a fabrication. And when they do, I will destroy your company. I will strip you of your license. You will never build so much as a doghouse in this city again." I almost smiled. He was playing checkers while I was playing chess. "Go ahead, Ethan. Hire anyone you want. They'll put a seismograph on the 48th floor and they'll get the same readings Anya did. They'll check the welds and they'll write the same report. It's a fact. It's there. You can't bribe gravity. He leaned over my desk, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I know what you're doing. You've been jealous your entire life. Dad saw it. He knew you were just a bitter little man in my shadow. He gave me the penthouse because he knew I was the only one who deserved it. The mention of our father was the spark. My carefully constructed calm fractured for just a second. He gave you the penthouse because he was a gambler, I said, my voice like ice. And he bet on your charm over my math. It was a bad bet. Ethan stared at me, searching for the weakness he always knew how to exploit. He found nothing, only a wall he didn't recognize. He straightened up, pulling the tattered remains of his dignity around him. This isn't over, Leo. Oh, I know, I said as he turned and stormed out. We're just getting started. The moment the door closed, I turned to my real work. Ethan's threat to hire his own team was predictable. He would try to bury my findings under a mountain of expensive, conflicting reports, creating enough confusion to stall the city. My next move had to be surgical. It had to turn the city's investigation from a procedural headache into an unstoppable force. I made a call to a contact I had at the Department of Buildings, a man named Henderson who owed me a favor from a decade ago. I didn't ask him to do anything illegal. I didn't need to. Henderson, I said. Leo Sterling, quick question for you. Who's the city's top inspector for high-rise structural integrity? I'm not talking about the guy who signs off on permits. I mean the bulldog, the one who lives by the code and can't be bought. There was a pause. You must mean Marcus Thorne, Henderson said, his voice wary. The man's a legend. Finds problems other engineers miss in their sleep. Why? Just updating my professional contacts. I lied smoothly. Thanks. Marcus Thorne, the perfect instrument. Now, I just had to point him in the right direction. I couldn't send him my father's marked-up blueprints directly. That would be too obvious, too personal. It would look like what it was, a vendetta. The evidence had to feel discovered, not delivered. I spent the next hour drafting a document on a clean computer, using a public VPN. It was an anonymous letter, addressed to Inspector Marcus Thorne, head of high-rise compliance. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. It didn't make accusations. It asked questions. To Inspector Thorne, regarding the Sterling Tower investigation, the reported HVAC vibrations on the 48th floor are a symptom, not the disease. Ask for the original 1990 architectural change orders for levels 90 to 100. Compare the specified steel I-beams in the primary plans versus the materials detailed in the final construction addendum. The discrepancy will be filed under Value Engineering times Lewis. Furthermore, run a new simulation for lateral wind load at 100 feet. Do not use the outdated 1989 city code the tower was built under. Use current meteorological data reflecting increased wind shear documented over Lake Michigan in the last decade. The original design's margin for error was dangerously thin. Time and weather have erased it entirely. Time is a concerned engineer. I printed the letter, put it in a plain business envelope, and drove to a mailbox in a different neighborhood. As I slid it into the slot, I felt a grim satisfaction. I hadn't given Thorne the answer. I had given him a treasure map. The X marked the spot right under my brother's feet. Ethan thought he was fighting me. He had no idea his real enemy was a man he'd never met, armed with a building code and the unassailable, unforgiving laws of physics. The city's investigation was no longer about a minor vibration. It was about to become a hunt for the catastrophic secret I'd been keeping for 25 years. The letter was a stone dropped into a still pond. I spent the next 3 days watching the ripples spread. I didn't have to look far. The city's business journals began murmuring about an unusually comprehensive review at Sterling Tower. Ethan's expensive engineering firm, a prestigious group known for rubber-stamping billionaire projects, was reportedly being stonewalled by a single, immovable city inspector. I didn't need a source to tell me his name was Marcus Thorne. My phone rang late on the third day. It was Ethan, but the rage was gone. replaced by something I hadn't heard in his voice since we were children, and he'd broken our father's favorite watch. Pure, undiluted fear. "He's in the archives, Leo," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "Thorne, he's not looking at the HVAC deck anymore. He's demanded every change order, every addendum from the original construction. He's digging up the foundation." I swiveled my chair to look out at the Chicago skyline, where the Sterling Tower stood like a monument to my family's hubris. "He's a thorough man, Ethan. That's his job." "This isn't thorough. It's a witch hunt," his voice cracked. "My own engineers say he's chasing ghosts. They can't stop him. He keeps citing some obscure clause about historical, structural integrity. He's looking for something. What did you tell him?" "I told you before," I said, my voice cold and flat. "I didn't have to tell him anything. Some things are just there, waiting to be found." He was silent for a moment. I could hear the city traffic bleeding through his phone, a reminder of the world that was rapidly closing in on him. "Dad's signature is on some of those old files," he finally said, his voice small. "I know," I replied. A new sound entered the conversation, the distinct alert of a severe weather warning from my desktop computer. I clicked it open. A massive low-pressure system was churning over Lake Michigan, barreling towards the city. Meteorologists were predicting gale-force winds, gusts exceeding 70 miles per hour. The kind of wind shear my father had bet his legacy would never have to face. The test wasn't just coming, it was 24 hours away. The next morning, the city didn't just knock on Ethan's door, it kicked it down. It came in the form of an emergency bulletin that flashed across every news channel in Chicago. It wasn't a suspension of occupancy for 10 floors. It was a mandatory, immediate evacuation order for the entire Sterling Tower, all 98 stories. I watched the live feed from a news helicopter, the camera panning over the building's gleaming facade. Below, the first wave of police cars was cordoning off the block. Employees and residents were streaming out onto the sidewalks, bewildered and alarmed. The reporter's voice was grave. "Sources within the Department of Buildings have confirmed that Inspector Marcus Thorne has uncovered a critical structural deficiency in the tower's original design, specifically concerning the penthouse levels. Computer simulations, using data from the incoming storm front, suggest a catastrophic failure is not just possible, but likely under the predicted wind load. The flaw, described as a cascade failure risk, could compromise the integrity of the entire structure. A cascade failure, the penthouse wouldn't just collapse. It would pull the rest of the building down with it. My father hadn't just built a faulty roof, he had designed a guillotine and placed the entire building underneath it. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Anya. "Obstoris Constalis, they found it." The I-beam substitution. Thorne's report calls it the most criminally negligent act of value engineering he has ever seen. "You did the right thing, Leo." Did I? I looked from the news report to the old blueprint on my desk, my father's arrogant signature staring up at me. My plan had been to publicly shame my brother, to force him from his stolen throne. But the truth, unearthed by Thorne and amplified by the coming storm, was bigger and more terrible than my private vendetta. This wasn't about a party or an inheritance anymore. It was about the thousands of people streaming out of that building, people who had slept and worked and lived their lives inside a time bomb. Ethan called one last time. I saw his name flash on the screen and let it go to voicemail. There was nothing left to say. I had started this with a whisper about microfractures, and it had ended with a city-wide evacuation and a legacy turned to dust. I looked at the approaching storm clouds on the radar, a swirling mass of dark green and red, natural justice. My father had gambled against the laws of physics. Now the wind was coming to collect the debt, and I, his forgotten son, was the one who had sent the bill. The wind began to scream that evening, a physical howl against the city's glass and steel. From my apartment window, miles away, the skyline was a battlefield. The Sterling Tower stood as a dark monolith against a bruised, violent sky, its warning lights blinking into the abyss. The news channels ran a split screen, a frantic meteorologist on one side, a live shot of the tower swaying against the gale on the other. My design, his sin, being judged by the storm. I finally pressed play on Ethan's voicemail. His voice was a ragged, broken thing, stripped of a lifetime of entitlement. "They know, Leo. Thorne found the change order. Dad's signature." A pause, filled with the static of a shattered world. "The news, they're calling him a fraud. They're saying the Sterling name is a lie." A sob tore from his throat. "You didn't just ruin me. You erased him. You erased everything." The call ended with a sound of pure, hollow despair. I had spent my life imagining this moment. I expected a surge of savage joy, a cathartic release. Instead, I felt a profound, chilling quiet. The satisfaction I had craved for decades was simply absent, replaced by the stark clarity of a balanced equation. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction. I hadn't destroyed a legacy. I had exposed it for what it always was, a hollow facade built on a lie. The wind shrieked, and for a terrifying minute, watching the tower shudder under a 75-mile-per-hour gust, I thought it might actually come down. The math I had run as a 19-year-old boy flashed in my mind. The cascade failure. I held my breath, a detached spectator to my own grim prophecy. But it held, battered, scarred and condemned. But it held. The storm passed by dawn, leaving behind a strangely peaceful city. The Sterling Tower still stood, no longer a symbol of power, but a tombstone, an empty shell, publicly shamed and structurally worthless. My revenge was complete. It wasn't the explosive demolition I might have once fantasized about. It was quieter, more absolute. I hadn't needed to tear my brother from his throne. I just proved the throne was made of paper, and then waited for the wind. What would you do in my position? Would you warn him about the unsafe apartments, or would you let him find out the hard way after what he did?